We're honored to have you as our guest. I am your host, Kinara Sankofa, and this is Education in the Community. And today we've decided to call this show Mental Disorder in the World of Psychiatry. And today we have 4 powerful guests. And I'd like to start to my far left with Dr. Niinana Kweku. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome back to the show. It's good to have you again.
Great being here again. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for coming out. And to his right is Dr. Linda Lagemann, a member of CCHR, which is Citizen Commission on Human Rights. Is that correct?
Yes.
Terrific. Thank you so much for joining us here on the show.
Thank you.
And to your right, we have Professor Manu Ampim, who is also a historian, a researcher, an educator with, is it the College of Contra Costa? That is correct.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And to his right, we have Moyende Kamali. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, brother. I'm glad to be here.
It's glad to see you again. And Mr. Kamali is also a healer and a powerful man in bringing the interest of activism to our community. Thank you for joining us.
Sir.
So, we have a very powerful show, and there are some things that are happening in our community that is actually happening in the world, and I think most people are not aware of it. And so I wanted to invite you all to the show, and I'd like to ask this question from any one of you. Is there anything, what is called in the psychiatry industry, worth validating for mental disorder? Is there such a thing, or mental illness in the community that is happening in the world, as a matter of fact? But we keep getting these infomercials and so forth about if you have a disorder, let's say you're smiling too much, that can be classified as a disorder. If you are too fat, that's a disorder. If you're fidgety, that is a disorder. And so we have these psychotic drugs that are being administered to the public. And is there any validation in the world of psychiatry that can validate that this is actual something that's going on? Let's start with yourself.
Well, as far as my studies are concerned, there's no scientific basis for, there's no scientific test that you can do, test a person to check if they have a chemical imbalance, and there's no way that you can tell whether a person has a mental disorder or not. It's, psychic, psychiatry comes from the word psyche, which is a Greek word. And what a psychic is. They kind of see into the future. Well, you can't see into a person's brain. You can't tell what's going on in there. So there's no scientific basis for it at all.
So how are we able to, how are they able to say, well, this person has a mental disease or a mental disorder if there's no scientific proof that this is actually something that is actually happening in the brain? Can you test it, in other words? Doctor?
No, you can't. And how they can say it, they can't legitimately say it, but they keep on saying it, and they keep on putting more and more people on drugs. Right now in America, between 1 in 5 people or 1 in 4 people is currently on a psychiatric drug. So it has been phenomenally successful. The whole defining people's mental, emotional, spiritual struggles and calling them disorders. It's amazing that it has gone as far as it has gone because there is no science.
So if there's no science, so how are the, let's say the pharmaceutical industry, which is connected with the psychiatry industry, which is the American Psychiatric Association. And would you also throw into that loop, and anyone if you can answer that question, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and also the FDA, how are they all connected, if we can say, because we're being pushed with these drugs on the market.
Yeah.
And if you know a drug is going to cause, let's say, social imbalances within the body, how is the FDA allowed to continue to push this onto the market? Anyone can, Mo, would you, Mr. Moyende?
Yeah, I mean,
Capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, global domination, profit, all these play a role in controlling people.
So you're saying it's about controlling people and not actually helping people.
It is definitely about control. It has nothing to do. There's no money in the cure, so they ain't trying to cure nothing. And just like your the psychiatric, you know, the state of existence, you could say, you know, it has nothing to do with a cure, because you know, what is it, a $330 billion industry, and there's not one cure.
Yes,
It has nothing to do with a cure. There's no,
Right.
there's
And so you're agreeing with
a
this.
cure.
Totally, yeah.
You know?
And right. I mean, it's ultimately it's about control, and then it's about profit along the way. And when you ask how can this happen, and there is, I think, the most destructive force on our culture right now is the alliance between psychiatry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the government. And the new Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM that came out, the DSM-5 now, which is the thing defines and labels, you know, everything. 70% of the panel, the members of the panel who were making those diagnoses, saying what's a disorder, what of your behavior is a mental disorder, and what of your behavior is not, 70% of them had direct, multiple financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. That's right. And in some of the work groups, you know, they're by categories. So in the mood disorders work group that's defining bipolar and depression and that, 100% of the panel, 100% of those psychiatrists had financial ties to the drug companies that are making the drugs to treat what they decide is a disorder.
Okay, so let me ask this, Professor Manu, because we talked about this, I think probably about a week or so ago. You were working with a young family, I think it was a young lady, and her son was so-called diagnosed with ADHD or ADD. And so you're saying, from my understanding, that you could take a child and if he is having this behavioral issue, you can talk to him or her, and it's a lot about the discipline as well, as opposed to having to give them an actual drug to calm their nerves down or whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
Okay, can you speak on that a bit?
To shape and to direct and correct behavior has always been a social phenomena, and so we've always been able to direct and correct behavior in society, and particularly among children. But now with all of these so-called disorders and syndromes, and the drugs to alter behavior, this has been pushed on youth. So when I first heard about this attention deficit disorder about 20 years ago, I was stunned that the parent actually told me something like this, when every day I had the children, young girls and boys, sitting down, learning and achieving at a level that they had never achieved in the regular public school system. But now as a historian, this was even more alarming, because for me, we look at the origin of it. So these invention of syndromes and disorders, I mean, it's made up. So we go back to Samuel Cartwright. This is a prominent doctor in the mid-19th century who in 1851 wrote an essay on drapetomania. And so in other words, he said that the fact that Africans, they had this sulky attitude and ran away, this was a disorder. And that this disorder could be treated by either beating them or even cutting off a toe or some kind of a limb. And that this was, it was a disorder, and this is how he defined it. And so we have a history of this, and not only that, but after slavery ended with the Civil War back in 1865. After that, we have the eugenics movement, and Francis Galton and other leaders of this outrageous movement. And so he helped to launch this idea of eugenics, or good genes, to produce this superhuman. And part of this idea was to define a large percentage of the population as feeble-minded. So what is feeble-mindedness? Whatever you want it to be. Who's a moron? So they start defining people as feeble-minded, as
so this
morons.
is like part of the DSM, if you want to use that, because you can add anything, and this book continues to grow. I remember the first one came out, the first issue was 1952. And within that one, has 184 pages, but 134 so-called disorders. We're up to number 5 now.
Yeah.
And it's 4 times as many disorders in this one here. So it seems that it continues to
Yeah.
add and add more disorders, and these disorders are coming from the psychiatric or the association claiming that the world is a problem or having all these mental issues. So if, let's hypothetically say, if I lost a loved one and I'm feeling the pain of that loved one and I go to, let's say, a psychiatrist and explain I'm going through some pain, are you saying that in most cases that they probably be administered a drug?
Yeah, it
It's
would.
quite possible, yes.
Yeah.
You believe so?
Yes, definitely.
And why is that?
Well, the thing about it is like you say, it's an industry to make money. And we have to understand that it's more than that, though. It's a twofold thing. Psychiatry is part of this whole process of trying to population control. It's not just a matter of controlling people. He was talking about the eugenics movement with Galton. These people thought it was okay to kill people who they found undesirable. And that could be anybody, like you say, anybody could look at me or you and say, we're feeble-minded, and so we serve no purpose on this planet. So that's what this whole process is about. It's not about right or wrong or whether somebody is sick. It's about controlling the population. And this is one way of ensuring that people will not reproduce, because these medications that they put these people on, some of them sterilize you, they cause brain damage, they cause heart failure.
Suicide is one of the major things that
One of the
actually-
major things, I think, in the military, at one time there was 8,000 men committing suicide after they were released from service, from using these psychotropic drugs.
As a matter of fact, you touched a very important part, because the CCHR have actually released a documentary called The Hidden Enemy, Psychiatrist's Covert Agenda. And any of these people that have gone to war, have come back, these soldiers have come back, have gone through some sort of stress.
Yeah.
Just from being away from your loved one can be enough by itself. So if he were to go to, or she were to go to a psychiatrist, and I was watching this documentary, and certain words trigger in the minds of psychiatrists that one can now be administered a drug because he or she is have a mental disorder or a mental illness. How is this possible?
Yeah, I want to kind of back up on this a bit, because to show the roots of this, we're talking about the eugenics movement and that all of that and the atrocities there, that there's a present time manifestation of the same thing. And this can happen because there isn't any science involved. It is not a medical profession, even though it's tried to claim that.
So you can't, in other words, go and do a blood test
No.
and say, okay, this person has this disorder, or
Right.
an x-ray, see
Right.
broken bones, this person has this disorder. So that has nothing to do with
Right. So, right, in the most stark way you can imagine, there literally is no science involved. Absolutely none. So that means that all of those diagnoses are entirely subjective. And because they're entirely subjective, they are completely vulnerable to any bias, any prejudice, anybody's twisted mind. They're completely vulnerable. So, fast forward to today, and how does this manifest? Well, minority boys are 11 times more likely to be put on a powerful psychiatric drug than white boys are.
11 times?
11 times. They are 11 times more likely to be put on a psychiatric drug.
Okay, let me ask you, why do you foresee that African males are 11 times more to be put on these drugs? It is because we understand that there's one issue with dealing with these psychiatric drugs. But if it's 11 times, would you say more than anybody else? Any other culture, any other race, in other words?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so if that be the case, would that be possible? We're looking at racism thrown into that equation?
Yes, and we all know there are many levels of that, where conscious and not conscious.
Right, right, exactly.
And again, when you're talking about something that is not a science, then it's all vulnerable to that. It's not